to forego her business and hit the pavement to look for a traditional 9-to-5 to cover her expenses. She could almost hear her family cheering in the background. They'd like nothing better than for Holly to have a normal job, as if that would offer her the security they thought she needed. She groaned again, looking at her ceiling, blinking heavily in order to quash the threatening tears of frustration. Everything had been moving along just fine until this morning. Holly quickly scrolled down her online bank statement for a third time, hoping against hope she'd missed something. Sometimes being self-employed was the hardest job of all. The last few months, she'd put most of her extra cash flow into a new computer and operating system, as well as the shiny new workstation just across the room. But you needed the storage and space. You deserved it. Your business deserved it. Her bank balance had definitely gone on a crash diet. If she'd known she'd lose her biggest client, she'd have waited before forking out that kind of moolah. Then again, if she'd known Alan would drop her without warning, she'd have been prepared with a backup plan. She knew to always be prepared. Or she thought she had. She'd definitely failed on preparedness this time around. And the shelter. That still niggled at the back of her mind. They needed her. Told her repeatedly that she was a godsend and that they'd never have been able to afford the services she gave them free of charge. She couldn't let them down. Losing Alan cut like a knife, a jagged knife that went straight for the jugular. She swallowed the gritty sand filling her throat and closed her eyes, rubbing her temples as a small throb started. Okay. Breathe. Calm down. Think. You need to talk to Alan. Make him see reason and give you back your job. You're just as important to him as he is to you. But first, you need to figure out a way to get into the fundraiser. And that requires a date. She couldn't go to a couples through the ages event as a -1. She grunted her frustration as she threw the costume over the back of her brown leather sofa and folded her arms. If only Roth were home, but her bestie had gone out of town earlier this week. Should she call Andrew or Alex? Either of her brothers would fit the suit, but then she'd be forced to explain how she'd broken up with Clark. And, more importantly, that she needed their help to save her business. From there, word would travel the family grapevine, and she'd end up forced into a conversation she wanted to avoid, at least for a while longer. That conversation would lead to her parents trying to talk her once again into getting a traditional job, living a traditional life in a traditional home instead of her urban condo. Holly loved her condo, all 700 square feet of it. Turning from the sofa, she slid her hand along the granite countertop that separated her living room from her kitchen, then grimaced. Mom would go on and on about how she liked Clark, how Holly and he had seemed so right together, blah, blah, blah. If only Alan had listened to her earlier when they'd talked on the phone instead of hanging up on her. If only he'd given her a chance to state her case. If only the party didn't require her to have a date. If only she hadn't been uninvited. How come there were so many if-only moments in her life today? She needed to calm down and make a plan. Holly closed her eyes. Okay, Roth wasn't available, and her brothers were definitely crossed off the list. Maybe Will? They hadn't parted on bad terms, but last she'd heard, he'd gotten serious with someone new. More than likely, that someone new wouldn't want to loan him out, especially to an ex-girlfriend, on a Saturday night. There was always Steve. Holly ground her teeth as she paced. If she opened that can of worms, she'd only be asking for trouble. He'd latch on to her again in hopes of convincing her to give them one more chance. Not happening. She eyed the vintage sunburst clock above the mantel of her gas log fireplace. The flames flickered and gave her a sense of calm. Winter in Michigan had drawn to a close on a final cold front a few weeks back, but she would continue to flick the fireplace on all year long for the ambience. Sometimes even in the heat of July. Holly's jaw tightened as she snapped off the ambience. She better start thinking about her gas bill, as well as every other bill in her file cabinet, until she had this dilemma figured out. Her attention returned to the clock as the minute